Normal, how you doing?
Pleasure to have you on Perth Red Dialogues. We have been talking on and off on LinkedIn and so many places, and I found your story so interesting. Then I thought you should come on the podcast and share your experience and whatever you have been sharing offline with me as well. Uh, and the interesting part is that I came as a migrant to Australia, so I have my own experiences. But then you went from Australia to Vietnam to teach English, which is
Hmm.
a reverse experience. So I'm very interested to know what your experiences were, and if that experience is similar to my experience, and the similarities and challenges and things like that. So yeah, it's so interesting to have you.
Yeah. Thanks. We do have a lot of similarities in some ways, I suppose. We all do, no matter where we're from. But I guess I went to Vietnam. The main reason was primarily to teach English. That's what I wanted to do. I hadn't done it before officially. I'm a mechanic by trade, and then I travelled, and then I worked in Australia down in a ski resort, and I was always drawn to uh, helping people with their English and communication skills, non-native speakers. Um, and I kind of had a bit of a skill for it, and I enjoyed it. And I chose to move to Vietnam for a few other reasons. I'd been there before traveling. I loved learning about the history, and the food and the people are amazing. And I also wanted to understand what I wasn't so politically minded back then, but I wanted to understand what this communism was. What is this other political ideology? So there were so many things attracting me to Vietnam, and that's why I decided to stay there. I wanted to be kind of close to home as well.
What was your first impression when you actually reached there? Like, is it because I was shocked when I landed here
Yeah, in a good way, or
in all sorts of way, in all sorts
yeah.
of way.
What was the biggest thing that shocked you when you arrived to Australia?
Right. So I came in June and July. I think July. So India, it's very hot. So I came with that thing that okay, it's going to be hot as well. Shouldn't be much difference. And the day I arrived, like it's July is cold here.
Mm.
So that was first experience. Uh, Another experience was the air quality. India, and I come from Delhi, so the air quality was very worse. AQI levels are in hundreds. Air quality index levels. I think Australia has got like 40s, 40, 45, and we are in 400s. 10 times the air quality is worse. So that was a shock. And the third was that when I was coming out of the airport to wherever I was going to live, there were so many parks on the way, just expanse of land left out. That's your park, and I said like that is paradise.
No one's using it. Just
It's
space.
just there. It's just there. No one is using it, but they are such pristine conditions. They've been so well maintained,
Mm. Yeah.
and no one is using them. So that's paradise.
That's
There were so many things there. You know, the fourth one which hit me very first thing when I landed on the airport was in India. Like if even if you leave your a candy on a table, it won't be there after 5 minutes. Someone would have taken it up, gone. And I've seen people here just leaving their iPads and phones and things on table. They just go to the coffee bar and like get their coffee. The things are still there on the table. No one's touching them. No one is bothered. They just walk in their life and they're happy. So
so in the cafe.
in
In the cafe,
cafe
you
on
see this.
airport itself.
Yeah. That's true.
So like when you talk about like I'll take you to paradise. Well, there'll be no hate. There'll be no greed. Everyone respects each other. I thought this is a paradise. Great land, great air, great people. No one is bothered about anyone else. They're not pushing each other. They're not shoving into each other. There's no sweat, there's no heat. Fantastic land. So that was fantastic. How was your experience when you went to Vietnam?
It's funny when you were telling me those things, mine were almost related to a similar thing, but the opposite experience. You know, when I first got to Vietnam, um, well, I'd been there before. I'd traveled there before I'd actually moved there, but the heat and humidity is obviously the first thing that hits you as soon as you get out of the airport. And but aside from that, it was just the busyness, the traffic, and even the pathways and the parks. You were talking about parks. The parks are usually packed, especially on the pavements leading up to the paths. Or the busyness was the first thing that really kind of hit me, and it was both a positive and a negative thing. Like I really enjoyed the togetherness of people. How I thought it was amazing how so many people can be in one small space, and there's still this kind of harmonious feeling where, you know, in Australia, we tend to kind of spread out a little bit. And if you're too close to someone, people get a little bit annoyed by that. Like at the beach, if you go to the beach or the park and and you sit a little bit too close to someone, well, you just don't do it. You make sure there's a bit of a space. But in Vietnam, and this was in Ho Chi Minh City, it's the way people share such a small amount of space was the most obvious thing to me when I first got there, and I loved that, but I also didn't like that. I liked the way that we could do it, that they could do it, but also it's hard to escape, and the only place you can escape is where you live, you know, in your room or in your apartment or house. And so I found that a little bit claustrophobic, to be honest. And I still did after living there for so long. I mean, this is just the most obvious things. It was food, and just the availability of food, and just, you know, you look down a street and there's people selling food on the street, and then there's restaurants next to the people selling food on the street, and there's so much good food, tasty food, and and so much dedication to producing it as well. It wasn't just a job. Um, it wasn't just something they did to earn an income. They did it from their homes. It was a part of who they are, and you were actually brought into their home. You know, you'd be eating, you know, a rice lunch in someone's living room, and you'd look up and you'd see their pictures of their family on the wall, and over there'd be a shrine to their dead parents, and a baby would be up there sleeping in a hammock, and you're just eating in their living room. That that doesn't happen in Australia. Yeah, not in a commercial sense anyway.
Yep. Yeah. So so that's probably your first impressions. Were there any long-term impressions that you have gathered, or any cultural shocks that you have might have experienced in terms of Australia versus Vietnam?
I guess something that also has really rubbed off on me from living in Vietnam for so long, and you know, interacting with a lot of different people, is the openness to share and to um, support someone else. And I guess that comes to that. I mentioned the physical closeness before, but this is more like a togetherness, I guess, or um, living close by each other. You're much you're you know what's happening in each other's lives. I'm just thinking about neighbours where I've
Mhm.
lived. You end up sharing your lives not just with the people inside your house, but with the people um, living beside you, opposite you, the people who live down the alley who you see every day. Now, that's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing. It's a trade-off. Um, you can't do anything without people knowing you're doing something. Um, you can't you can't leave your home without being watched by someone somewhere in the alley. There's always someone there watching you. And once again, that there can be benefits to that, but long term, I found it coming from Australia and living in a not really a rural area, but suburbia. It was something that just because you couldn't escape it, unless you went far outside the city, even in the countryside, you get that because it's just so dense where people live. But I found that constant, whatever whenever I had a day off, I would always try to find somewhere where I could escape that kind of constant feeling of surveillance. Yeah.
It's interesting you talked about surveillance and always someone looking at you, because you also said that you were going to experience, or you would have heard about communist Vietnam, right?
True.
So how was that experience? Like, did you see that communism in action there, or has it changed, or what was your experience?
Well, it's I think it's very different. Vietnam is not like China. It's often seen to be like a younger brother to China, or a cousin, but it's very different. I wouldn't have stayed for over a decade, 12 years, 12 or 13 years, if it was so restrictive as what I've heard and what I've I've seen what China is like, or other countries. Um, it's a bit of a like most people who will travel to Vietnam. There's a bit of a contradiction because it's very capitalistic. You see people buying and selling stuff everywhere. Um, there is a lot of opportunity to do business and to trade and to um, there's a lot of commerce, but um, I guess the politics, the governing structure of the country is still a communist regime. So that's one thing actually I also learnt, because I was a bit more aware of it when I lived in Vietnam, politics that is. Like most Australians, I grew up not really understanding politics and not really wanting to understand politics because I didn't need to, and my parents never really spoke about it, and we where I lived, it's not a really politically charged area. Um, but I learned that the culture and the political system, the people and the leaders are not necessarily one and the same. There's a lot of differences between those levels in society. But at the same time, there is a certain level of representation of the culture in the political system. So yeah, it was very interesting to see all that and experience it. Yeah, and especially spending a lot of time and um, having a lot of different opportunities to experience that in different areas of life. Yeah.
So that's a at a supra level, at a more focused level in which you were interacting in your classrooms or you were teaching wherever. How is that teaching environment different from Australia to Vietnam? Is it the same classroom style, teaching style? You know,
Yeah, it's quite different. Um, it is definitely like it's a lot less. And I don't think this is necessarily the political system. I think this is the cultural system, the Confucian values that are still underlying in Vietnamese culture. but it's there's a lot of respect for teachers. It's almost like an automatic respect. It's and to be honest, that was actually something that made me feel a little bit uncomfortable at first because people would be, and actually even in the end, it made me uncomfortable to be honest. So I would be given so much respect and almost worship by being a teacher, but I hadn't felt like I deserved it yet. And so there was that kind of, yes, 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 don't, I know, yes, I'm a teacher, great, yes, thank you. I understand teachers should have so much respect. I think that's something that's actually really lacking in Australia. But the automatic respect I was given just because of my role, and to be honest, some of the jobs I got when I first went there were just because I was a foreigner and a white foreigner. So it's quite easy to get a job, or it was back then. Still is now, but it's there are some challenges. But it was easy to get a job back then, and so it's like, well, I don't need this respect, but I wanted to earn that respect as I kind of went on through my teaching. In terms of the classroom, it's it's very much so I taught in a few different scenarios. I taught in language centres, I taught in kindergartens, and I also taught in public schools. And it's very regimented. There's routines, and um, there's particularly in public schools quite crowded, quite big classes. Some classes are 40 to 50 kids. And they're very hot classrooms and very noisy. And it's very hard to sorry, it's very hard to have effective lessons in some of those rooms. But yeah, it's compared to Australia, there is less individualism in the students. Yeah, and partly I think that's just also because of the size of the classrooms. You can't have that.
Right. So, going from Australia, did you had to change the way you taught these classes in terms of your teaching style or the how you speak to them or anything?
So I actually hadn't had any classroom experience in Australia before I went to Vietnam. So I was, apart from my own experience being a student in one, but I'd gone straight from uh, being a mechanic effectively, and then going to Vietnam and teaching with a little bit of tutoring experience beforehand. But I went straight into the classroom, and it was difficult. It was difficult at first, and it took me many years working for in a few different scenarios, and sometimes with private companies, also with small classes, other with fill-in work at primary school, public schools, primary schools, and language centres. But it wasn't until probably wasn't until about 6 years after I'd been teaching that I kind of hit a point and I realised actually I forget how I picked this up, but it was it was when I started focusing not on myself, but I started focusing on the students much more, that I actually really started to enjoy it much more, and it started to make a lot more sense, and things started to go much smoother, and I was much more confident at doing what I was doing. Where before I was, because I hadn't had so much guidance, and I'd kind of not come from a teaching background, I was kind of finding my way for the first 5 or 6 years. And then after a while, I realized once I focus purely on the students and not worry so much about my experience or how I feel, it's much better for them. And then in turn, I found that much more effective and enjoyable. And I guess that's when I started realizing I wanted to stay in that field. Yeah.
Um, you talked about some, like, initially you getting jobs because of the Vietnamese reverence for a white Australian coming and teaching them. How did you saw that thing, reverence in Vietnam, and how do you think that reverence is still there when Vietnamese come to Australia as a migrant or migrate to Australia, and they see so many?
Yeah.
You are in a white country now.
Yeah. Yeah. Like and this kind of reverence, it's actually, there's a reverence there for foreigners in general. Anyone who's a foreigner, there is some kind of reverence from the Vietnamese people, because it's like you're a guest in their home, and they want to make sure you have a good time and make sure you enjoy the country, and so on. But so that still happened the whole time when I was living there, and it was almost like, even going to restaurants or the cinema, or even in, leaving the supermarket or something, lining up for the bike, I would always get preferential treatment, or people would be really generous to me because I was a foreigner. And particularly that I was obviously a foreigner from a Western country. Whereas I had friends who were from Korea, or friends who were Chinese, or so sorry, he was Chinese Canadian, but living in Vietnam. But because he looked Asian, he didn't get, and we spoke about this a lot actually when I was there, but he didn't get the same treatment as I did. That was just naturally because they saw him not as a foreigner initially. They realized he was one, but that is another thing that made me feel uncomfortable. It's just like, I don't want to be treated like a famous person. I don't want to be treated like someone special. I just want to be normal, but it's hard sometimes. First world problems, I guess, but it's better than being treated badly. Definitely, there's this kind of, you're singled out based on the color of your skin and how you look, and you're stereotyped because they see you as this certain person, but they treat you nice. So it's better than the opposite, which often a lot of Vietnamese get when they come to Australia. And it's like the opposite, if I go to Vietnam, I'm automatically put up on a pedestal. Unfortunately, the sad reality for a lot of Vietnamese, as an example, if they come to Australia these days, they're definitely not lifted up on a pedestal by the community here. In fact, it depends on their circumstance and their lifestyle, but they are generally seen to be somewhat below, just because they are from elsewhere and they're Vietnamese, and Vietnam's a poor country, and um, you came to Australia because you had nothing else better back in your home country. That's the kind of perception that a lot of people have here. Not everyone, but a lot. So it's quite different in that regard. Yeah.
So, overall, like, in your experience of so many years in Vietnam, what were your biggest takings that you took when you came back? Big experiences.
Yeah. Um, they're definitely more like personal growth. Um, Luckily, I had a lot of opportunity over there um, to work on. I don't like the term understanding myself. or anything like that. But it's true. I was able to have experiences over there that I could have never had here in Australia, and through teaching as well, but also things in my own personal life. I was able to uh, get into a fair bit of meditation while I was over there for a certain period of time, and so I got to sit a lot of courses, and I connected with a community over there and was able to develop myself in that way. Um, so I think some of the things that some of the characteristics that I've seen change in myself since living in Vietnam was I became a bit more patient with things that did not go as I'd hoped. So when things don't go to plan, or when things go badly, when I'd hoped they'd go well, I'd I had a bit more patience to not react, and to understand that that's what had happened, and that things will change eventually. Um, I think a lot of tolerance interrelated with that as well. Tolerance of other people, as in another culture, the Vietnamese community, but also living so close to other people, you you have to become more tolerant, because if you don't, you're going to have such a miserable life, because you're constantly, and I guess I haven't been to India, but I've heard India's like Vietnam's on steroids. You know, you have to tolerate um, things around you that you don't necessarily like.
It is. And the more you were telling about Vietnam, the more I was visualizing my own country and my streets. Like, it's the same. So I
Yeah,
might be very much home if I go to Vietnam. Um,
there's some similarities. Yeah, yeah.
w- uh, but in the same sense of overall experience, are there any challenges or downsides to going and teaching in a foreign country for an Australian?
There are. So there are. I guess when I look back on the time that I was there, one thing I did miss was a mentor, or just the mentors, the teachers, the learning you get in a work environment in Australia. So because I was either working with a team of Vietnamese or a few foreigners, but the foreigner teachers there, usually in the situations I was in, um, they weren't necessarily experienced or passionate about teaching. So it was very hard to discuss things and to bounce ideas of each other. I was very lucky. I ended up in a good role when I was over there towards the end of my time, um, where I actually learned a lot of some younger um, girls in South Africa, from South Africa, as teachers. But the workplace culture generally in Vietnam too, it's not very it's not very supportive of that kind of growth. So there's a lot of competition within workplaces, and while there is workplace training in some of the larger companies and the more forward-thinking companies, a lot of the times as an employee, you're just expected to stay in your place and not have these grander visions of learning more, or kind of not going up the ladder, but maybe developing yourself. You're not supported in that way by colleagues, um, because you're a potential rival to the next promotion, or your boss is not going to help you because, well, you're not supposed to know more than them. That's the Confucian kind of hierarchy thing. It's kind of so that's one thing I missed is that that support and that mentorship you get from colleagues. Something else maybe in my time there that I missed was, yeah, I guess, and this was particularly noticeable to me over the last 3 to 4 years when I was a bit more involved in the business community and researching local markets and things like that. And I found I was a bit stifled in terms of honesty. Like I want to, I'm a very honest person, and I want to be honest with other people, and I want to communicate with other honest people. And I and in saying that, it's not that I'm pointing out any dishonest people, but there is this kind of restrictive pressure to not be too open, and even when you want to find the correct information, you can't necessarily find that. I guess it's not so transparent when it comes to business and the law, and there's a reason for that, I suppose. And once again, we were talking about trade-offs before there. Maybe there are some benefits, but from my perspective, I wanted to I want to be as honest as I can, and so I want to be in a system where that's valued. And I still think Australia, even though we're not perfect, and there's always challenges, but I think honesty is still rewarded in Australia. Do you agree?
Right, right. Uh, so now that you have come back, and I understand you are looking to expand on your experiences and working in that English training work in Australia as well. Tell us about that work that you're trying to do, you're developing.
Yeah, so not, I mean, English training, yes. This is for migrants, so migrants who are coming to Australia or have lived in Australia for a while. But English is important. But a lot of I've been tutoring more or less ever since COVID. I've been tutoring and mentoring on and off, but mostly on during that time. And I found a lot of students coming to Australia, a lot of migrants coming to Australia, even people that have been here for a long time. They struggle to communicate, but it's not English. English is not the thing that's holding them up, and English is not the only factor in effective communication. So there's three things that I think at least many migrants and actually many Australians probably could do with this kind of focus to
Mhm.
help communication too, and that's cultural understanding of Australian society. Um, a lot of people say that, and I've heard people in certain programs to train migrants say Australia has no culture. Australian culture is multicultural. I would argue against that. We do have a culture. Um, I think multiculturalism is an aspect of it, but I think there are also other important factors to Australian culture um, that unfortunately a lot of new Australians, a lot of people coming here are not really made aware of. So that's one. It's culture. Confidence is a big thing in a lot of English learners or migrants coming into Australia, they have the English, they have the English skills. A lot of them have already gotten certificates, and they've proven to themselves and to the authorities that they have the ability for English. But when it comes to speaking and communicating, they don't have the confidence. And the third one is just the conversational practice, which ties those things together. And it's very hard to get that going out onto the street. You can't just walk up to a stranger and start talking, because most people living here, they don't really have the time or patience to speak to someone who is not capable of communicating as easily as them. And I guess there's a lot of barriers holding them back to do that. Yeah.
You know, I've worked in that sphere of building the competencies of new migrants to get into jobs and things, and that was such an rewarding experience for 2 or 3 years that I did. But I've already grappled with this question that when all the migrants who coming in have to go through an English test, is there really a business case for the government to spend again on the English programs? AMEP is there, there's SEE is there, there's so many programs there. Should the government be spending money on English training?
English training, as in English training specifically, for some people, yeah. For some people, they're particularly someone like if I think of refugees, generally refugees, their English level is not up to, or sometimes it's non-existent. Or family members of new migrants coming over, perhaps their English is not good enough. And also migrants coming over here to work or for whatever reason, sometimes they need help with English. But a lot of the time, these government programs that are running, there are a few, but the issues is that they're not directed at working migrants. Generally, they're suited to those who are unemployed. Secondly, they focus on English. They don't focus on those three things that are really important. So for example, you could have great English skills, but if you go up to talk to someone and they may not have great English skills, or they might have perfect English skills, and that's going to be intimidating to you. And then you might not know what to talk to them about. How am I going to have a conversation with them? What am I going to say? And so instead of, even if you have great English, there are so many other factors that go into communicating. So that's where I think a lot of the programs that exist now, they're overly focused on English only. Whereas if they were more focused on culture and values are part of culture, or at least acknowledging that there's a cultural and value perspective that new migrants and new Australians have to understand, and the confidence and the conversational practice. But so generally, this kind of idea grew out from my experience in Vietnam. Not so much teaching, but my experience living there. And so there's three factors to understanding and integrating into a culture and enjoying living in that culture. So first, you have to know what it is that you love about that country. So why did you go to that country? What was it about that country? Let's talk about Australia. So what was it about Australia that attracted you? First of all, what is different in Australia compared to to where you're from, your home originally. There must be something different about it or something you like about it. Otherwise, you wouldn't come, I assume. Even if that could be for financial reasons, it could be for um, lifestyle, it could be for the fresh air, it could be for anything. But there's always a reason that someone wants to come to Australia. Second of all is an understanding of the systems and the values that made that thing possible. So it's knowing what you like about Australia or what's so great about Australia. Second is understanding why it's like that. And thirdly is learning how you can contribute and you can play a positive role in our shared future. So more of an active outcome. So it's awareness, observation, and action, like a 3-step. Yeah. And a lot of the programs that exist now, if they're only focused on English, they're only going to develop English. Whereas if there was a focus on those 3 aspects, the English will develop alongside that somewhat naturally. And there also needs to be heavily experiential led. So it needs to be a lot of stuff outside, a lot of engagement in the community, ideally more than in the classroom. But I know that's difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you talked about that 3 aspects of the culture, the values, and then the international part of it, the functional part of the English training. And
Mm.
WA, Western Australia, has just come out with a proposal of a WA Multicultural Act, and I'm working on it, reading it, and I think they're trying to equalize themselves to all the other states where all the other states already have such acts. So they are trying to come up to that place. And one of the thing with multicultural push, that narrative that I see in the discourse here, is that all cultures are the same, all religions are the same, all value systems are the same. So what is so special about Australian culture or Australian values or Australian religion or a lack of it or your individualized things? That's the one question that
Mm.
always comes up. And then you said that Australia does have a culture. And I was reading a book on, yes, we do have a culture. And I'll share more about, there's another podcast coming on that thing as well. But
Great.
how would you come up, or how would you describe the Australian culture to, as a teacher, because you're trying to teach this thing to someone, that yes, we do have a culture and these are the part of those cultures or that you're trying to come into, and you will be interacting or seeing these components or markers of this culture wherever you go out in the public?
Yeah. So I think it's very hard to describe Australian culture, or you even ask someone who's lived in Australia their whole life, what is Australian culture? What are Australian values? It's difficult for them to answer, but I think that's also very fitting because Australia is a complicated culture. We have a complicated history. We're not like we're not like almost any country on earth, where there are some with similarities, but not. Australia is such a unique country, such a unique place, and so I think it's first to recognise that we do have a complicated history, particularly the last. Well, if with a lot of students as well, you've got to. It depends on the individual as well, which is why if I'm working one-on-one, some students really love learning about Indigenous culture and the First Fleet and the Gold Rush and big things that have shaped modern Australian history over the time. Some people are not really interested in that, so you've got to adapt it to suit. Um, that's with working on one-on-one. But um, Australian culture, Australian values. You were asking me how do I explain what that is to students? Yeah, a lot of the times I will ask, what do they think Australian values are? And they're confused. I've got a Japanese client now, just arrived in Sydney a few months ago, and he is so confused because he doesn't see Australia. His words, he goes, I don't see Australia. He goes, I don't know what to think. What is Australia? Um, and I've been going bushwalking with him as well, which actually that comes down to. I'll get back to that a little bit later, bushwalking. But um, he sees it's hard for him to kind of grab onto something solid. There's three things that I generally like to focus on when it comes to understanding what is Australia. And because this is something that anyone shares, no matter where we live in Australia, no matter where we're from, no matter how long we've been here for. And that is the great outdoors. So nature. The nature's beautiful, the birds. That's one thing I have really gotten an appreciation for after living in Vietnam and some big cities there for so long. The birds in Australia are just amazing, and the trees, and like you said, the parks and the greenery and the great outdoors. That's something we all can experience, and I'm sure we all appreciate it in our own little way. So the great outdoors is a big part of Australian culture. The distances. I think distances are something we all share, and there used to be a thing called the tyranny of distance, and that was like that was talking about being so far away from England or Great Britain, actually. But you also have that across the country, and that could even be if you live in the suburbs in Western Sydney. There is a distance to the city centre, or if you want to get something, there's an inconvenience in having to go somewhere or having to wait for something to arrive. That inconvenience because of the distance or that experience of traveling somewhere is something we also share. These are not like the obvious things with Australian culture, but this is kind of something that I kind of think that we can all understand at least. And the third, and maybe this is somewhat controversial. No, it's not controversial, but it's the Anzac spirit. So I think the Anzac story and the Anzac spirit are separate things, but the Anzac spirit, they are things that we can all understand and appreciate because that is what makes the Australian character. And so these are things like, it incorporates a lot of things like the idea of mateship, bravery, fortitude, like transparency, lots of there's different factors in that Anzac spirit. And I think that's something that while not everyone can relate to the Anzac story, most people, no matter where they're from, they have those characteristics in their culture as well. But it just comes from a different place. But it's something that we all share, but it's just not so obvious at first.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you were talking about the great distances here. It reminded me of when I was about to come to Australia. I was reading about, some things to know about in Australia, and there is a website called Bobbin Oz. So, and he wrote that one of the peculiar culture of, I think he's a English guy, he lives in, I think, Brisbane somewhere. So he said that one of the striking feature of Australian culture is, we'll see. So if you call a handyman to do something in your house, he will say yes. He will take your bookings and everything. He will come to you, but he will decide when he wants to come to you. The time is stretchable, and he will say, "All right, we'll do it someday." But
Hmm.
there's nothing like that thing. So that's another distance of time, that if you tell
Yeah.
him now, we'll do it, and that's 10 years before. So things have changed now, and there's no call out fees and these things here. But that's 10 years before I came, and I
Yes.
think it's so interesting. That's distance and time, not distance and distance.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was very interesting.
And an inconvenience. And there is, and this is something I've noticed with primarily I've worked with a lot of East Asian students, so Japan, Korea, China, Vietnam, and beyond, but mostly those cultures. And the highest value, convenience comes before everything. Convenience is at the top of the the needs. Like things have to be convenient
Hmm.
in East Asian culture. That's something that people strive for, and I understand that too. Convenience is great, but I think in Australia, you're never going to get the convenience that you have in, in those nations. Even India, a very convenient place in some ways, I'm sure, in the big cities in particular. But but yeah, that inconvenience from those distances of physical distance, but also the time and just the possibility. Sometimes things are just not possible in Australia.
Um, Another thing you talked about is values, right? The Australian values and things. And interestingly, I think recently the Liberal Party said that they want to bring in testing those values as part of the visa application process. That they will be testing the new migrants for those values. Where do you think this will lead us to? Like, are we going to be actually able to test people on values, or should we first teach them and then test them, or should we, you know, I don't know how we would do this.
Yeah, I don't know how you would test. I don't know how you would test someone on their values other than to put them into a situation where they have to somehow develop. And even if you do hold that value, maybe you won't be able to show it at the time of the test. But that sounds to me when I hear that, it's like, well, you can't test. I don't know how you're going to test for the values. So what are you only going to bring in people from, Australian values? If you look at the history, I mean, they are adopted from the British system, but other countries who were not part of the British system also hold those values. So which values are you going to pick and choose as the most important? So, for example, I was talking to someone a few months ago. They were doing a research project. This is a few years ago, um, and they didn't actually get the chance to do it, but they wanted to develop a matrix where you had different, to keep it simple, different countries up the top and values listed down the bottom. Australian values, obviously, they would be decided upon by um, who would, or what they were. That would be decided upon by the researchers. But you would correlate which values these people also held, whether that be family values, and you can go into details about that, or whether that might be rule of law, or whether that could be um, some kind of other belief. But you could draw a grid, like a matrix, and then you'd actually find out that these people here from India, they actually share a lot of similar values to Australians. It's just it looks different, but at the end of the day, the values are similar. So I think if you're going to start bringing people in based on their values, I think that's too much meddling. If you're talking about something like that, it sounds like a lot of, I mean, it sounds like the White Australia policy, right?
I don't know.
Potentially.
Uh,
Potentially. I don't know. But
or it might be that you're looking to test, like when a person comes on shore, and then you test them on what they do during their process from arrival to getting a citizenship. You're seeing what they are doing in the terms of their actions, and are they matching up to the Australian values or whatever we say, for example, democratic process or rule of law or
yeah,
these things or these things or these things. It might be that.
and it could be something that kind of carries on after they're living here,
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
course.
Hmm.
Um, but it's also very hard to. So one thing that my program doesn't necessarily do is that I'm not exactly teaching values, because I think that is quite complex, and I mean that's shaped when we're young. But the main thing what I do is just to raise an awareness of these values. That's the first thing, to raise an awareness and to have an experience, and then you at least understand about the culture a bit better, where
I
it's not
think
exactly teaching values.
I
It's not
think
somehow it's it's teaching values, but it's not embedding the values. I think that's really hard to do.
sure,
And
sure. I think that's where you teachers like you come in and professionals like you come in who can identify that these are the Australian value systems, and the earlier you can identify with them and act in those values and incorporate them into your working, that will be much faster to work in a wider workplace or public sphere.
yep, yep. I I also think that if there is going to be a program like that, like looking at, I mean, I can understand that, yeah, a migration program, at least a migration program based on values, is better than a migration program based on skin color or country of origin, even, or there needs to be some kind of needs based analysis as well
Hmm.
when it comes to migration. But that's something else I also don't do, is that I don't get into the weeds of policy too much, because, and this is actually where I've had some difficulties in approaching people over the last several months, is that I've told them, I'm not dealing with policy and migration necessarily. I'm dealing with the situation on the ground right now as it is. And that is, there are migrants here and they're struggling to thrive. They're struggling to succeed and have a good life and integrate into their community. And a lot, despite a common misconception, a lot actually do want to become Australian, but they don't know how to become Australian. And they're told that they shouldn't become Australian. And I think that's a pretty terrible thing to welcome someone in and say, you don't have to worry about understanding us. Just be yourself and you'll be fine. I get that, I don't think we should ask migrants to give up all their traditions and all their customs. But of course they want to, many of my students over the years, they want to understand Australia. And like I was saying before, the Japanese client in Sydney, he's confused. he's not sure what Australia is or how to navigate the business world here. And so education can help overcome those barriers. Once again, education is shrinking time. That's what education does. It it allows you to jump over hurdles and overcome misunderstandings and gaps in knowledge quicker, rather than waiting for a whole lifetime to figure out things. With the help of effective and comprehensive education and training, you can get it done much quicker, and then we can be a much more productive and cohesive society, especially in the workplace.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think what you are doing is an expanded version of what we were doing, because we were training these new migrant professionals only in workplace culture. But what you are trying to do is wider culture, so you can not just be competent in workplace, but competent in public sphere as well. And that's a good idea, and I think that should be explored more. Uh, you said you don't want to get into policy, but I do have a question on that, because you posed a question on LinkedIn, which was, who teaches the migrant about Australia? Is it the outsider versus the local perspective?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. Um, so I I've been lucky enough. I've been able to speak to a few teachers within uh, a government program teaching migrants here. Both of them were fairly new migrants themselves, within 15 years. So they didn't grow up in Australia, and they were teaching um, classes of new migrants how to speak English and understand. It was more to do with daily tasks, opening up a bank account and getting a license and day-to-day things like that. Um, and to be honest, after I spoke to them, because I was actually on a trip at the time, and I was visiting some places, some very important places with to do with Australian culture, um, and they didn't know about those places, and they didn't want to learn about them. And I thought, oh, that's strange. And then I mentioned what I was doing, and it was like, oh, that's great what you're doing, and I like how it's from a different perspective. But you have to remember that Australian culture is multicultural. And so I was like, I know where you're coming from, but it's also an incomplete picture of the reality of Australia. I mean, there is a long history in Australia. Multiculturalism, what we know now as multiculturalism, is only a fairly recent um, part of that history, and it's a part of it, an important part of it, but it's not everything. I think that's a bit of a mistake to actually think that that's all we are, and that's all we're ever going to be. And that made me think. Well, okay, I understand a lot of the programs like to have migrants and people who have gone through the naturalization process and the education process themselves. But then I also think, well, is there something else that's getting missed out? And it's nothing from their nothing untoward to them, but they didn't grow up in Australia. They grew up in a different country, and they've come to Australia. Okay, they can teach. They can teach fine. It's no problem. But there are also benefits from learning from a local teacher who's also had external experience. So from my perspective, that's why I was bringing that up, where they have come from the outside in. I have come from the inside out, and now I've come back in. But I think there is value in understanding on migrants, understanding migrants, but there's also values. There's a value in having an Australian who understands an external perspective or another country, but has a different perspective on what Australia is, and perhaps a deeper perspective or a more holistic perspective, just for the fact that they had grown up in Australia. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
that
yeah,
was
yeah,
a bit
yeah.
long-winded, but
Of course, it makes sense. Um, this is something which I was reading that when British came to rule India, they had within first few years they had established colleges and Asiatic society and things where the local teachers were teaching the British all aspects of language and culture and individualized religious laws. And Muslims have their own laws, Hindus have their own laws, personal laws. So British were learning everything just so that they can rule India. So
mm,
if you want to understand Australia, there has to be a teacher from the Australian background or community who can teach you why this. So someone can say we believe in democratic principles, but why? Why has there's how and a why in teaching. How how is anyone can teach? Why is something who understands the background can teach better probably. So that's a good
and
one.
has experienced it. Yeah,
Experienced it, living here, been brought up in that system, so you can
yeah,
explain it better. So yeah,
yeah.
I did find that as a very interesting question that you posed. So I thought I should ask you more about on that.
Well, because I think that I only posed that because I think the automatic. It seems as though the automatic default is we should have migrants teaching migrants, and I mean I think migrants can be equally as good teachers as a local. I'm not saying a local is a better teacher necessarily just because they're a local. In fact, that's that's one of the things that I think is an Australian value is that we don't we don't necessarily um, put that individual as part of the collective. That individual has merit. They have merit in their own experience and their own skills and their own passion and knowledge. And I think by saying they are a migrant, they will teach better. He's a local, he doesn't understand them. And I think that attitude in general is anti-Australian because
Right.
it's taking away the individual's merit
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
putting them down to a stereotype.
Yeah. It divides. It divides. All these things divide. I don't know why people do it, but it is what it is. Um, Another question that I have is how do you see, like, there is in recent days there is a renewal of this discussion that these are so many migrants coming in from these countries. How do you think they are changing the Australian society and culture that you know of from your days of growing up?
Yeah, I mean, where I grew up actually is just north of Sydney. It's actually it wasn't very multicultural at all when I was young. Um, it's changed now visually. You can see it. It's changed definitely over the last few years. Um, so what do I think has changed because of the current migration patterns? Is that
I
the
would
question?
say because some changes do happen, and that's the new Australian environment and the new migrant who's coming in who is trying to learn about the new Australia or the current Australia has to know of it, and the government has to teach them, or professionals like you have to teach it. So how do you teach them that's the Australia of yesteryears? This is how Australia is changing. That's possibly the Australia of tomorrow. How do you see that transformation?
Yeah. And this is actually something that comes up sometimes as well with students, and they talk about, oh, I don't get the opportunity to talk to many Australians, and it's like, well, what do you mean by Australians? Do you mean like me, or because actually up until recently,
Mhm.
even I've heard this. I wasn't alive at the time, obviously, but even in the 50s, 60s, 70s, Australians calling someone an Aussie, it was a synonym for an Anglo Aussie, so
Mhm.
an English British background. And then you had the Italians, you had the Greeks, you had the Croatians, and they would say he's an Aussie, as in he's an English Aussie. But they would all call themselves different nationalities as well. But um, definitely the definition of Aussie and an Australian is changing. And I think one of the biggest hurdles we've faced since I was young, just noticing this, is that that change in um, belonging and understanding who we are and what is our culture. That change has been pretty rapid, and that is what it is. It's happened. It is happening. But I think not being able to talk about it openly and honestly has been the biggest problem with in terms of social cohesion and in terms of people understanding who they are and who we are. I think that inability to talk about it, that fear of being labeled the R word, or or even just people kind of not wanting anything to do with you. I think that kind of that hesitance and the inability to have that conversation openly and honestly, is has been has added more difficulties than we actually need. Yeah.
I know, I know. Uh,
Um, but other than that, um, yeah, I guess once again, it's a kind of like it's not really a policy related question, but it's a culture related question. It's quite different because I left when I was like 23 to go live in the UK for a few years. Then I came back to Australia. I went to the mountains, and then I went to Vietnam for 12 or 13 years. So, in fact, even me coming back here now as a middle aged man, compared to when I kind of lived here before, I'm still learning it's like I've got to learn everything again, particularly in terms of the change in demographics. Yeah.
right, right, right.
So I'm
Uh,
very, very aware of that at least, and still find it interesting. Yeah.
it is interesting. It is very interesting. Um, One thing that you said about like encouraging the migrants and your students and in general to go and talk to strangers. How are you going to talk to the stranger? They might be more qualified, less qualified, more English competent than you, less English competent than you. How do you actually do that? Because I've seen that hesitancy too much, especially in the people on spousal visas who are spouses and who don't have
Mm,
English competency, or who don't get that opportunity to go to work in somewhere. They
mhm.
only go to shopping malls for shopping or anything. So how do you actually encourage people to go and talk to strangers?
Actually, that's a great term. Talk to strangers. Yeah, because that's actually something like we're talking about um, communication skills of migrants here, but actually, all Australians, whether how long you've been here, need to work on communication skills.
Hmm.
Um, there are a few techniques to make it easier, and so that's experiential led learning is or experiential activities, I would say, that get the student outside their bedroom or their office or get them out onto the street into somewhere else that they don't usually go, and then having steps that provide them an opportunity just to have a simple interaction. So it could be asking something they're comfortable with, of course. So asking where the toilet is. So there's an activity that I do with some students where they go to a local club, like an RSL or a league club or a bowling club, and they will go up and order a drink and they will ask a few key questions. So, where's the toilet? Where can I sit? Um, Simple engagement like that, at least in those activities, because a lot of, as you said, a lot of people don't even get that opportunity, or it's rare to get that opportunity, but then to sit back and reflect on that engagement. So once they've had that experience out at a club in person, we reflect on that in class and we talk about how they felt, how they would have, what they could have said differently, what are some other questions they could have asked, not just that. So come up with different questions. So it's all about experience, observation, and reflection. And hopefully that helps to at
Yeah,
least
yeah.
develop confidence step by step. It's a slow process, but it's it's something that really does help. Maybe not with people with crippling um, nervousness or anxiety, but also those activities can be done not just with the student, but it can be done with a child. Like if they have a son or a daughter, it can be done with a partner. So it can be done with support of family or even friends.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It
Yeah.
is very important. It is.
Yeah.
Uh, Another question would be in the sense of the use of technology in learning and building capacity. Do you use much technology, or do you encourage, or any tools that you use?
Try to keep it as simple as possible because I tend to find technology sometimes, I mean, it can help. It can help. It depends on what you're doing, but sometimes it can also distract from the process. So something else I also do with, if possible, if I live close enough to my students, so most of my work is online, but if I live close enough to them, I can visit them and meet face to face because that's when it comes to teaching and doing things online, it's really tough to build rapport with some people. It depends. With others, it's easier. But once you meet face to face, everything becomes real. And then also that communication becomes more real. Once you've developed that rapport and once you've developed that real connection, that's when things can become a lot more. I found in some students, they've opened up a lot more. And whenever we meet online after that, it's like a different person sometimes. But when it comes to stuff technology, there are some ideas I'm toying with apps for self-led learning and experiences offline as well, which could really very low tech stuff still, but it's just quizzes that will take people through um, places near where they live. And instead of me preparing it one on one, the app will be able to find places and locations and take them out into the community and get them to engage um, more independently. But then they also miss the opportunity, if they're doing it by themselves, they miss the opportunity for reflection and discussion on that topic, which is also really important to have that discussion and that kind of debate. That discussion allows for me to push back on some things they say and for them to try to reword it or to see things from a different perspective. And that's really important for understanding, communicating in the workplace, but also accepting individual perspectives, especially in a small class when you've got 3 or 4 students and they will share their experience and it will be a totally different perception to the others. And they will have a discussion and ask questions based on that as well.
Yeah, sure. Good. That's there. That's there.
So less tech, really. I try to use less complicated tech.
Yeah, of course. Before we close, would you like to share anything else that you might have missed or which is beyond what we discussed?
Huh. I guess one of the challenges, actually, just reflecting on over the past several months as I've been reaching out to connect with people, business owners, but also people in the industries and sectors that I would like to collaborate with. I found a little bit of, and this is pretty common, like across all areas of society, is like a bifurcation of the extremes. So often I found it difficult to connect with people in this industry and even larger training houses, because sometimes I will mention what I do to someone and they say, "Oh, you're encouraging immigration. You're the problem. You're creating the issues because what you're doing, you're making it easier for them, and that's going to encourage more to." And I'm like, no. I'm helping the people who are here because that's good for everyone. It's good for them, and it's good for us. But I have pushback from that. Some people thinking you shouldn't be helping, which is pretty shocking. And then you've got other people who say you shouldn't be helping, but they're on the other end of the spectrum who say, how dare you push your perspective onto these poor migrants who are coming into the country. We shouldn't put any pressure on them. And it's like, well, I'm not putting pressure on them. I'm actually trying to support them. I'm trying to help them because many of them need help. And then they're not able to access the right kind of help that they need. And so I get a lot of pushback from those two extremes. But the outcome is the same. And that's generally migrants not getting the help they need.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to walk that middle path, I guess, and find that middle ground. And I think that is actually just a syndrome of our age, right? It's across many different areas. That's something I've just personally noticed, and some of the bigger challenges I've faced in trying to talk to people about this.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for your experiences. It's very interesting, especially because I have worked in that sphere for a few years, so it's always to reconnect and relive those experiences and my experiences as a migrant as well. From every there's a lot of connections there. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And would you like to share any contact information how people can reach to you in case someone wants to?
Probably the best way to contact me is through LinkedIn. So that's Mark Radcliffe on LinkedIn. You'll be able to find me, I'm sure, or also through my platform, which is Ironbark Learning. So you'll be able to find that website, ironbarklearning.com.au, or find me through LinkedIn with that as well. Yeah.
Good. Not a problem. Thanks. I'll put the links in the video as well, so that'll be easier. Thanks, Mark. Thank you for sharing.
Thanks, Normal.
See ya. Thank you
Thank
again.
you.